Dino Rock Zero Weight back in our video. 1997 year in review continues with WCW Fall Brawl right in the great outdoors because it's such a beautiful day outside. Why spend it wasting away inside? Why don't we watch and why don't we review a mediocre WCW pay per view outside? Anyways, Full Brawl. What's there to talk about? Well, there's a lot to talk about, but not most specifically about the show. This show, it's mostly talk about the build-up and the aftermath because there's so many important moments that happen in the build-up and the aftermath of Fall Brawl. I'm going to talk about the build-up. So the major story going on here, major story, is Arn Anderson's retirement. And it was a very heart-wrenching retirement. You had Ric Flair crying in the back. He talked about how he had all this nerve damage. He broke his hand. He can no longer wrestle. He talks about spots. And it's just a great retirement speech. But then the week after, we have one of, maybe not, one of, if not the greatest parodies in all of wrestling. When you talk about great parodies, you talk about Gilbert. You talk about DX on the Nation and Domination. You talked most recently about Southpaw Regional Wrestling on its parody of 80s territory wrestling. You have this parody, the NWO parody of the Four Horsemen. And it's probably one of the greatest, one of the funniest segments I've ever fucking seen. So you have Kevin Nash, who looks like a giga version of Arn Anderson. He comes out with this styrofoam cooler hosting up the four. He has a neck brace on, and he talks about spots and how he's going to give Curt Hennig not a dog spot, not a liver spot, not a spotlight, but his spots. And they say spots so many times, not yours, not dog spot, not liver spot, but my spot. And he talks about how he broke his left hand, the significant importance. That's the hand he opened beers with. A fat broad slap me on the back and send a chill down my spine. It's the funniest fucking thing ever. If you don't find that comedy, you're not a wrestling fan. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people don't like this segment. And this segment got a lot of heat. But according to Kevin Nash, everyone was okay with it until, the aftermath where, his son, Arn's son, was made fun of and bullied because it made him look like his dad looked like a drunk. So I thought this thing was so funny, talking about spots and fat broads and unpaid bar tabs and all that crap. So just look it up. Just look it up. I might send a link below for it. And then you have what goes on after this show. What goes on a couple of weeks after Fall Brawl. And that's where we have you might heard of this guy. I'll describe him very quickly. He's bald. He has a goatee. He has a tribal tattoo. He he wears gloves. He wears black trunks. He wears black boots. He does spears. He jackhammers. He says you're next. Well, he didn't say you're next at first, but he signals you're next. You might have heard of him. His name is Goldberg, and he becomes one of the biggest stars in WCW history and actually helps WCW out and legitimize them. And it really helps them be later on when WCW's dying. It actually helps WCW out, and it actually keeps them afloat until they inevitably fuck him over. But anyways, and just make him more humanized, which was really dumb. Anyways, let's talk about Fall Brawl 1997. Eddie Guerrero defeats Chris Jericho for the Cruiserweight Championship. And you're wondering, wasn't Alex Wright the Cruiserweight Champion at Road Wild and he beat Chris Jericho? Well, just like, and you're right, well, just like how a couple of years ago, very couple recently, like maybe 2014, 2013, the Intercontinental Champion and the United States Champion, they would switch rivals. So you would have the Intercontinental Champion, The Miz. He would face, let's say, Dolph Ziggler. And you'd have the United States Champion, let's say, Dean Ambrose. And he would face, let's say, Kofi Kingston. And then, like 3 weeks later, they switched. So then Dolph Ziggler would face Dean Ambrose, and Kofi Kingston would face The Miz. Shit like that. So you'd have it like this, where Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero are feuding for the Cruiserweight title, and later on, Alex Wright and Ultimo Dragons fighting over the television title, when a few weeks ago, Eddie Guerrero and Ultimo Dragon was feuding. So stuff like that would go on with the Cruiserweight title and the television title and the television title and the United States title and the Cruiserweight title and the United States title and so on and so forth. They just switch back and forth. Whatever the fuck. This is a phenomenal match. What is there to expect from Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho? It's very fluent, very good, very great match. They have the uses of two rings. That's right. There's two rings because we have War Games, and I'll talk about what War Games is just in case you don't know what a War Games match is. And so there's two rings, and they use that very, very good. This is a great match. An 8 out of 10. Eddie Guerrero gets the Cruiserweight title, and he would go on to face Rey Mysterio Jr. in one of the greatest matches of all time in WCW history at Halloween Havoc. Next up, the Steiner brothers defeat Harlem Heat, and they would have their 10,000th match together. I don't know how many times these two sets of brothers fought each other in WCW, but they had to fight each other like a million times, because I swear to God, this is like the millionth review I've done on a Steiners versus Harlem Heat match. And honestly, these two teams, their rivalry is just there, but they don't really have any great matches together. This is just a mediocre tag team match. Nothing more to say. A 4 out of 10. They fought each other like a million times, honestly. Alex Wright defeats Ultimo Dragon for the television title in probably the best Alex Wright match I've seen. Dust Wonder Kid. Good match. Very good match. A 7 out of 10. Like I said, Alex Wright now is the television title because he switched titles and everyone just switched rivals. 7 out of 10. Great match. Next up, we have Jeff Jarrett defeating Dean Malenko in a number one contenders match for the United States title. Like I said before, these three titles in this particular time period would often switch if they involved a cruiserweight. So since Dean Malenko is feuding over the United States title, he would often get a cruiserweight title match and a United States title match and so on and so forth. Same with Jericho, same with Eddie, same with Ultimo, same with Alex Wright, so on and so forth, like I said before. So Jeff Jarrett beats Dean Malenko, and he will go on to face the United States champion. This is a decent match. I give it a 5 out of 10. And I'll tell you who the United States champion is in the main event. These next two matches, I just kind of just sat there. I wasn't really paying too much close attention to it. I don't know. Can you blame me? These next two matches are Wrath and Mortis defeating the Faces of Fear and Giant versus Norton. I mean, come on. These two matches are bad. Wrath Mortis, the Mortal Kombat team, 3 out of 10. Giant defeats Norton, 2 out of 10. Next. Diamond Dallas Page and Lex Luger defeats Randy Savage and Scott Hall in a decent match, a 5 out of 10. Of course, it's Randy Savage and Scott Hall. And of course, they're the ones that always ate the pins. You're not going to beat a Hulk Hogan unless you're severely lucky. Very few people beat a Hollywood Hogan. Roddy Piper, Lex Luger, Sting. On a very extreme circumstance, Ric Flair, Randy Savage would. These are the only guys who would beat a Hulk Hogan. For Kevin Nash, same difference. The only guys who would beat a Kevin Nash, Goldberg for Hollywood Hogan. The only guys who would beat a Kevin Nash would be your DDPs, maybe your Giants under extreme circumstances. Hell, Goldberg wouldn't even beat Kevin Nash. So, to take the fall for Hollywood Hogan, it would be Randy Savage. To take the fall for Kevin Nash, it would be Scott Hall. And Diamond Dallas Page and Lex Luger does this, and this is a pretty decent match, but it's not great. But what makes this match very unique is because you have two rings, oftentimes a wrestler, I don't know how the hell it would happen because they're so big. These are so big guys. But they would often get stuck in between the ring. and then in the rings. And it'd be a spot. Arn Anderson loved doing this spot. I think Dusty Rhodes did this spot like a million times to Arn Anderson. Um, Arn Anderson would be stuck upside down in between the rings, and Dusty Rhodes would like pull him up and down, pull him up and down, and just ram his head in between the rings in the War Games. So Lex Luger fell between the rings. It fell in between the rings, and he hid underneath. Larry Sabisco comes down because he's fed up with the NWO bullshit, the New World Order, as he would say, and he distracts Scott Hall. Lex Luger comes up out from he comes out in between the rings like he's the fucking Undertaker or he's like fucking Sting. You know the spots where they come underneath and through the ring. Well, Lex Luger comes out in between the rings through the same hole. He goes right there's a hole, there's a hole, there's a hole in between the rings, there's a hole. So he goes out in between the rings and he's schoolboy Scott Hall while Randy Savage is beating up Diamond Dallas Page. So Lex Luger and DDP wins the match in a very weird fashion. I don't know why Luger couldn't just torture rack the guy. I mean, it's Scott fucking Hall. He'll take the fall. Lex Luger made Hollywood Hogan give up to the torture rack. That's how he won the WCW title. He beat Hollywood Hogan with the torture rack like 3 times. So I don't know why Luger couldn't just torture rack the fuck out of Hall, but whatever. 5 out of 10. And then the main event, we have War Games. It's the NWO, but it's not the NWA team. It's Kevin Nash and the B team. That's Kevin Nash, Conan, Six, and Buff Bagwell defeating the 4 Horsemen, which is Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, Curt Hennig, who gets hurt beforehand, and Mongo. By the way, Mongo is the United States champion. Mongo is the United States champion. Mongo is probably the worst United States champion there ever was. And that is a list involving David fucking Flair. So how does this War Games match go down? Well, everyone's at... What is a War Games match? Well, before I get to talk about it, Curt Hennig gets hurt. He gets attacked by the NWO, and I use quotation marks, so I'm going to talk about it during the match. So Curt Hennig goes down. He comes out. He has a sling in his arm. Looks like he cannot compete. I don't know why you can't just get the 1 million guys you have in the locker room and to replace him, like a Giant, or hell, even a... I don't know. Just think of a WCW guy. Anybody. Fucking, why not just have, for no reason, Glacier come out and fill him in? It's fucking war. Come on. So, War Games, you have this gigantic steel cage and you have 2 rings, and it's 4-on-4 or sometimes 5-on-5. In this case, it's 4-on-4, and it's fixed intervals. You take what makes Survivor Series matches great, you take what makes steel cage matches great, and you take what makes the Elimination Chamber so great, and you put them all combined, and that's what you have in War Games. But the difference is it's not elimination, it's one fall. It's not pinfall, it's by submission. When everyone is in the ring, is in the cage, that's when it goes to the match beyond. And then the first person of a team who submits or says, I quit, in the match beyond, the match is over. So you only can win in the match beyond via submission. So you cannot win via pinfall. And none of these guys, save for a Ric Flair and a Chris Benoit, have submission moves. So how the hell are they in this match? Well, I tell you how this happens. So it starts with Benoit and I forgot who started it out. I think it was Six. So they started out, and of course the heels, they always win the coin toss, so then it gets a 2-on-1 advantage. Eventually Flair gets in, and then eventually Kevin Nash gets in, and then the time comes for Curt Hennig. Can Curt Hennig wrestle? He's in a sling. Well, Curt Hennig's the last man for the four horsemen. And so Curt Hennig gets in and he takes the sling off. And it turns out he's not injured at all. He has handcuffs. And the commentators are happy. It's like, oh shit, he was faking it all along. He's playing possum. He has handcuffs. We have a game plan, guys. We have a game plan. The Horsemen could possibly win this. And of course they don't, because Curt Hennig, just like every fucking other guy in WCW, if you can't beat them, join them. And Curt Hennig attacks Ric Flair with the handcuffs, and he handcuffs and the NWO team and Nash. They handcuff, if you will, the three horsemen, Benoit, Flair, and Mongo. And then Curt Hennig just joins the NWO, and he becomes the 999,000th billionth person who joins the NWO. And no, that's not okay. Yes, it's a hyperbole, but I mean, it almost might as well not have been, because everyone joined the NWO except a couple of people. Everyone and their mothers joined the NWO, but after they handcuff the Horsemen, this match it's just NWO beating up the Horsemen, and it's just Flair getting his ass kicked, which, if you want to see Flair get his ass kicked, it's every fucking night in WCW from a certain time period. When Hogan gets in WCW, Ric Flair gets his ass kicked a lot more so. And of course, this is in, I believe this is either North Carolina or South Carolina. It really doesn't matter. It's in Horseman country. And every time they're in Horseman country during the NWO era, Ric Flair got his ass kicked. And this is the epitome of ass kicking with Ric Flair. So finally, Benoit says no, he'll never give up. Mongo says no, he'll never give up. But I mean, it's just fucking bullshit at this point in time. And you're really just waiting until they say I quit, because there's nothing they can do about it. No one is coming from the back. I don't know. I don't understand it. You know, if this is NWO versus the world, why isn't people coming out? Finally, they threaten that if they don't say I quit, they will put Ric Flair. They put Ric Flair's head, and they will slam the cage door right onto Ric Flair, if they right in between the wall of the cage and the door of the cage, if they don't say I quit. And finally, they say I quit. I think Mongo said I quit, the United States champion. He says I quit. And, you know, just like how John Cena always does what his opponent's afraid of that they'll do if they don't say I quit, the NWO does it anyways. And so the NWO, Kevin Nash, he slams the steel door right on Ric Flair's head. And then they beat him up some more. They spray paint them, and then they cut a promo, and they embarrass the NWO again. So instead, the NWO getting their comeuppance, and instead of the Horsemen getting their revenge and getting their heat back from the parody that they had, the NWO beat the shit out of the Horsemen, just like how the Horsemen always gets their ass kicked. Ric Flair got his ass kicked a lot, and this is the epitome of ass kicking for Ric Flair. Honestly, I want to give this match a 4, but it is a War Games match. It gets a 6 out of 10. It's a middle of the road middle of the road as far as War Games matches goes. You have Stinger Squadron versus the Dangerous Alliance up here. Down here you have War Games 2000, and somewhere in between you have this. That's basically it. A 6 out of 10. And that concludes Fall Brawl 1997. It's a mediocre show. A 5 out of 10. A 5 out of 10. You have a phenomenal Cruiserweight title match between Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho. You had a great build-up in that awesome parody. You have Alex Wright and Ultimate Dragon. And even though it really is just NWO squashing the Four Horsemen, it is a War Games match. And War Games matches tend to be They tend to be good. Just giving it the benefit of the doubt. Overall, it's a mediocre show, and there is some bad tastings in this. Whatever. I can't talk. Anyways, 5 out of 10. Catch you next time. This review's gone on too long. I catch you next time for In Your House Ground Zero, and for WCW, I finally get to talk about Halloween Havoc. Thank you. Goodbye.